Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown Found Hidden Diary, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The ink was still wet. It was the kind of rain that soaked through your soul. The streets of Camden Street glistened with oil-slick puddles reflecting neon in long red smears that looked like someone had painted sin across the pavement. The wind moaned through alleyways and old fire escapes, carrying the scent of rust and wet tobacco. Somewhere, a saxophone played a bitter tune behind glass. The city was awake in all the worst ways. Wide-eyed drunks, slumped gamblers, and girls with lipstick too bright for the dark corners they stood in. Father Brown stepped from a rattling streetcar and into the downpour without flinching. He wore a worn cassock, black umbrella folded under his arm, like a monk with a secret. Raindrops clung to his round spectacles as he moved with a curious stillness, like a man used to storms, both within and without. He looked out of place on that street. Too soft for this world, too mild, but he walked with purpose, as if he'd been summoned by something deeper than a phone call. The note had come folded inside a hollowed-out Bible left in the third pew of St. Dimphna's church, a detail not lost on him. The script was rushed, almost trembling, but precise enough to catch his eye. Come to apartment 4B, Marlowe House. Midnight. The ink was still wet. Marlowe House was a tomb of a building, the kind of place where curtains never moved, and neighbors didn't knock. Apartment 4B sat at the top like a secret kept too long. The door was ajar when Father Brown arrived. He hesitated only for a moment before pushing it open with the gentlest of touches. Inside, the air was stale, with perfume, and something metallic underneath. The room was lit by the flicker of a broken lamp, casting long shadows across the floorboards. A cigarette burned itself to ash in a glass tray beside a typewriter. The paper still loaded. The ink still wet. He stepped forward slowly, inspecting the type. 5 lines, each one shorter than the last. He read them aloud, his voice soft as a prayer. He knows about the ledger. He found out where I hid it. They're coming tonight. I can't run any more. Forgive me, Father. The last line trailed off in a smear. In the far corner, a figure lay slumped on a worn chaise lounge, legs crossed at unnatural angles. A woman, red dress, dark gloves, and eyes open like she'd been waiting. But her lips had long since cooled, painted still, in silent defiance. There was no blood, no sign of a struggle. But death hung in the room like incense after a high mass. And on the side table, half tucked beneath a Gideon's Bible, lay a photograph, a younger version of the same woman, laughing beside a man in a white tuxedo, his arm draped over her, like a promise he never intended to keep. Father Brown removed his hat, more out of reverence than habit, and sat on the edge of the dusty settee. He stared at her face for a long time, seeing not the death, but the fear behind it. There was a sudden knock, too loud, too quick. Then the door opened without permission. Heels clicked in, a woman with legs like smoke and a voice made of gin and splinters. "I thought you'd be taller," she said, flicking ash from a cigarette she hadn't lit. Father Brown looked up mildly. "And I thought you'd be mourning." She smirked, but her eyes tightened. "Did she leave you the note?" "She did, and something else. Her silence." The woman stepped closer, circling him like a cat with a broken tail. "Her name was Kitty Devine. You know that, don't you?" "I assumed. Her picture's in all the right papers. Club singer, acquainted with men who gamble with more than money." She narrowed her gaze. "You a cop?" "I'm a priest," he replied, without pride or apology. "But I've found sin doesn't check your badge before it sits down at your table." She dropped into a cracked leather chair and crossed her legs like she was sealing a deal. Kitty had something they wanted: a ledger, names, amounts, blackmail material, or insurance, depending on who you ask. "Do you believe it got her killed?" She leaned in, smiling like a knife. "Father, in this town, people die over a lot less than truth." He nodded, glancing again at the typewriter. And yet she tried to tell it, with her last breath. The woman stood abruptly. "You don't belong here. This is a street for dirty souls and clean lies. Go back to your pews and sinners who still pretend." He looked at her kindly, but without softness. "I've always found that the darkest streets lead most directly to confession." She didn't answer. She just left, heels echoing down the hall like a warning. By dawn, the police had turned up, though they acted more like janitors than justice. The detective was a man named Harrow. Thick knuckles, thicker lies. He waved off Father Brown with a grunt and scribbled Kitty's death off as complications due to an illicit substance. No autopsy, no questions. "I believe you're mistaken," Father Brown said gently. "She didn't die from what she took. She died from what she knew." Harrow's grin was a crooked thing. "And what's it to you, Padre? You planning to resurrect her?" "No," Father Brown said, calmly folding his hands. "Only the truth. It tends to rise whether we will it or not." The detective gave him a long, sour look. "Watch yourself. Preaching too loud in this town gets you more than bad confessions. I've survived worse things than shadows, Inspector." Harrow snorted and left, muttering about damn priests and their riddles. The truth, however, did not wait for daylight. By noon, Father Brown had visited the last club where Kitty sang, the Crimson Vine, a place dressed in velvet and regret. The bartender, a lean man with eyes like wet stones, tried to pretend he'd never heard of Kitty, but his twitch when Father Brown mentioned the ledger gave him away. "She was going to run," the priest said softly. "Take the ledger to someone who still believed in justice or revenge. She never decided which." "You should leave," the man said, drying glasses that were already clean. "I will," Father Brown replied, "but not before you tell me who asked you to poison her." The man froze. "What poison?" "Arsenic. Tasteless in gin, especially when sweetened with absinthe. You put it in the bottle she always reached for. Her gloves were to hide the tremors." The man swallowed, and in that silence, the truth was written. By evening, the ledger surfaced in an unmarked envelope at Father Brown's rectory. No note, no sender. Inside were names, politicians, cops, judges, and even priests. Debts and favors, sins bought and sold like cheap wine. But at the bottom of the last page, someone had scribbled 3 words in the same ink as Kitty's note. "I trusted you." Father Brown stared at the words for a long time. Then he burned the ledger in the church stove, watching the smoke curl like incense. He would speak the names only when souls came to confess, not when mobs came to crucify. But not all sinners seek absolution. Some seek silence. And that night, Father Brown heard footsteps behind him in the alley near the rectory. 3 men, young, reckless, armed with sticks and smiles, made for dark deeds. "Evening, Padre," said the tallest, twirling a chain like a rosary. "Heard you been asking questions where they don't belong." Father Brown didn't stop walking. "Is that why you followed me? To offer guidance?" "Something like that," the second man sneered. "Or maybe just a reminder that priests can bleed too." The first one lunged, but Father Brown stepped aside with a swiftness that surprised them. He didn't strike. He didn't run. He only looked at them, calm and sure. "You think I don't know fear?" he said, voice steady. "You think I haven't heard confessions from murderers who wept like children after the deed?" They paused, momentarily thrown. "You know what's worse than pain," he continued. "Guilt that rots you slow. And it starts tonight, when you raise your hands to hurt a man who came to save the soul you've already buried." The chains stilled, the silence stretched, and then they backed off, muttering, vanishing into the fog like bad dreams. Father Brown adjusted his coat and kept walking. The rain had started again. Back in his rectory, he knelt, not in fear, but in prayer, not for himself, but for Kitty Devine, who died trying to cleanse a world that never learned how to forgive, and for the sinners who still believed that hiding a truth could keep it from rising. And in the small, flickering candlelight beside the altar, a sheet of paper lay on his desk. A single phrase, written in rushed, black ink. She never wrote the last line. Father Brown smiled sadly, picked up his pen, and completed the sentence himself. She died with the truth still on her tongue. Chapter 2. A knock beneath the confessional. It started with a knock no louder than a prayer. 3 sharp raps, quick and nervous, against the old wood panel beneath the confessional, just before morning mass, just before the sunlight broke fully through the stained glass. Father Brown sat in the booth, still lacing his fingers into contemplation, when he heard it. Not on the door, no. Lower, underneath, as if someone was knocking from within the bones of the church itself. He rose, quietly, opening the booth and stepping out onto the worn stone floor of St. Sebastian's. The incense still lingered faintly, mixing with the city's rot that seeped through even consecrated walls. He knelt, fingertips brushing the wood beneath the confessional seat where no sane man should be. And yet when he pressed, the panel gave a trapdoor one few even knew existed, used in older days to move quietly between chambers, to protect priests in times when bullets and faith had equal aim. It creaked open. A face stared back from the dark. She was young, though the city had already wrung youth out of her eyes. Dirt smudged her cheek, but her lipstick was fresh, smeared at the corners like a red flag half torn. Her coat was too thin for the season, collar turned high like a shield. "Close it," she whispered. "Please, they'll see me." He helped her out without a word. She was trembling, but not from the cold. Her breath came in gasps, like she'd been running all night. She clutched something to her chest beneath her coat. It bulged like a confession that refused to stay hidden. "Take your time," Father Brown said softly. She looked at him then, as if truly seeing him for the first time. She expected a man with a badge, or at least a man with a question. But all she found was patience. "You're not what I thought," she said. "No one ever is," he replied, "especially those who hide under churches." She laughed. "Once, it sounded broken. Name's Liza. I didn't kill him. I didn't say you did. But you're thinking it." "No," he said, stepping back and gesturing toward a pew. "I'm thinking you believe you're next." She sat down slowly, as though even the wood might betray her. "It was Mr. Cutter," she said after a long pause. "The club boss. Everyone in Midtown knew him. Owned half the cops and the other half's silence." "I've heard of him," Father Brown murmured. "A man whose sins were whispered through stained glass for years." "He's dead," she said, staring straight ahead. "Last night, someone slit his throat in his office at the Velvet Room. Left the door wide open like they wanted the whole damn city to know. And you?" "I was supposed to meet him. I was late." She clutched the shape beneath her coat. "I found him there, dead, blood everywhere, and this on his desk." She pulled it out. A leather journal, the kind that still smelled of glue and secrets. On the front, in gold-embossed letters, "Private Ledger." She held it out, but Father Brown didn't touch it. "Why bring it to me?" "Because the cops won't listen. They're all in on it. Cutter had dirt on all of them. Judges, city men, even priests maybe." "I wouldn't be surprised," he said gently. "You're the only one I've heard about who doesn't scare easy. They say you solved the Kitty Devine thing. Without a badge, without a gun." "I prefer the truth," he said, "over both." She looked at the ledger like it might start bleeding again. "They'll come for me, and they'll come for you now too." "I'm not difficult to find," Father Brown said, closing the confessional door behind him. That night the rain returned, heavier than before. The city blurred behind fogged-up windows and the smear of speeding headlights. Father Brown walked through it like a ghost in black, the ledger wrapped in brown paper beneath his coat. The Velvet Room was still cordoned off, with the kind of tape that meant nothing to anyone with money. He stood across the street beneath a flickering lamp and watched. A man stepped out the side door, tall, wolf-thin, trench coat soaked, and face hidden behind a fedora. Detective Harrow again, chewing a matchstick like it owed him something. He lit a cigarette, scanned the street, and then looked straight at Father Brown, as if pulled by some old invisible string. "You always pop up when things get messy, don't you?" Harrow asked, stepping close. "And you only clean the messes that pay well," Father Brown replied. Harrow's smile was slow and joyless. "That's rich coming from a man in a collar. How long before you turn that little black book over?" "I didn't say I had it." "You didn't have to." He flicked ash toward the curb. Cutter was gutted, neat as a sermon. Somebody knew what they were doing. It wasn't her. "Which means you know who it was." "I know why he died," Father Brown said. "Which usually leads to who?" Harrow narrowed his eyes. "You get in the way of my case, Padre. I'll bury you under paperwork thick enough to crush a soul." "Then be sure to read the ledger before you burn it," Father Brown said, turning away. He didn't go far, just far enough to slip down the alley beside the club, where the stench of gin and old sin lived together in puddles. He reached the back entrance and found the lock broken. Recent. He stepped inside, past crates of dusty champagne and broken promises. The office door was still splintered at the frame. Blood marked the desk and the carpet like abstract art. But the room wasn't empty. A man stood behind the desk, flipping through Cutter's remaining files. He was broad-shouldered, with gold rings on each hand and a scar across his left cheek, like a whip had kissed him. "Do come in," the man said, without looking up. "You must be the priest." "I must," Father Brown replied. The man looked up. "They call me Moxley, Cutter's associate, business partner, when he was breathing." "Business," Father Brown said, glancing at the bloodstain, "is messy. You think I killed him? I think you expected to inherit." Moxley chuckled. "You're sharper than your robe suggests. You know, Cutter once told me the only man he feared was the one who never raised his voice." Father Brown moved closer. "He had reason to fear you." "I'm not the one with the ledger." "No," Father Brown said, "but you're the one who forged the entry on page 32. That stopped him. The ledger had never left the church, and yet the mention of a specific page chilled Moxley like a midnight phone call. Page 32, Father Brown continued, shows a payment made on a night when Cutter was in jail, paid in cash, to a man who was dead 2 weeks prior. A lie tucked between truths, but even a lie leaves fingerprints. Moxley stepped around the desk. "You got no proof." "I don't need proof," Father Brown said quietly. "Just guilt." Yours was loud enough to hear from the pews. Moxley reached into his coat. A slow, deliberate movement. Father Brown didn't flinch. "I've spoken to dying men who held less fear than you do now." Moxley froze. "You really think words'll stop a bullet?" "No," Father Brown replied, "but they might stop your soul from slipping further." Something passed between them, not understanding, not peace, but pause. "Cutter was going to give it all up," Moxley muttered. "Turn it all over. Start clean. You believe that?" "Yes," Father Brown said, "which is why you killed him." Moxley didn't answer. He left the room without looking back. The next morning, Harrow came by the rectory again. Angry, tired, face like pavement, left out too long in the sun. "Moxley's dead," he said. Father Brown waited. "Someone tossed him in the river." "Ledger's gone." "No," Father Brown said. "It never left." He reached beneath the altar and brought out the book. Harrow stared, eyes darting. "I made a copy," Father Brown said. "One I'll give to the paper, unless you do the right thing." Harrow's jaw tightened. "You think this city still wants justice?" "No," Father Brown said, "but maybe it still needs it." Harrow left with the ledger, and for the first time, didn't threaten to return. That night, Liza stood beside the church door, wrapped in a new coat someone had left anonymously. Her eyes were clearer now, but not clean. "I read what you added," she said. "In the back." Father Brown nodded. "You wrote, 'He lied to save himself. She fled to save her soul.' You think I still have one?" "I wouldn't have hidden you if I didn't." She smiled, faintly. "What happens now?" "You confess," he said gently, "and start again." She hesitated, then nodded. As she stepped inside the confessional, the rain began once more, soft and slow. Not like punishment, but like absolution. Chapter 3. The widow wore midnight. It was close to 2 a.m. when Father Brown heard the knock, slow, deliberate, and hollow as a confession, made too late. The rain hadn't let up since dusk, and the street outside St. Aloysius was a glossy mirror of every broken promise in the city. The knock didn't come from a parishioner. There was nothing repentant in the sound. It had the cadence of someone who didn't believe in absolution, but needed something like it anyway. She stood in the doorway, tall, shrouded in black from hat to heels, with a cigarette holder dangling like punctuation between two crimson lips. The veil over her face made her eyes seem further away, like distant lights on a fogged harbor. She didn't step in, just let the rain streak behind her, like a train she was always just about to board. "Your Father Brown?" she asked, her voice low and smoky, like the back booth of a jazz bar that never closed. "I am," he said, stepping aside. "Though I suspect you already knew that." She walked in slowly, each step tapping a soft echo into the church's stone floor. She stopped in front of a statue of Saint Michael, stared at it for a moment, as if measuring up old enemies. "They say you find truth like some men find vice," she murmured. "That you don't wear a badge because it gets in the way. I've always found badges tell people who you are before they get to know you." She turned, lifting her veil. "My name is Lenora Dusk, widow of Thomas Dusk. You read about him, I imagine." Father Brown nodded. "The shipping magnate. Fell from the 23rd floor of the Clarion Hotel. They called it suicide." Her mouth tightened. "Of course they did. It's easier that way, easier than saying someone wanted him gone." He studied her a moment longer. "And you don't believe he jumped?" She laughed, a bitter, perfect sound. Tom hated heights. Couldn't even look over a second-story railing without gripping it like a child. He didn't jump. He was pushed. And now they're going to bury him without so much as an investigation, because his will keeps the right hands greased. "And you?" "Me?" She tilted her head. "I was supposed to inherit his empire, but the will was changed a week before he died. Everything's going to some offshore trust no one can trace. I get the summer house and a piano I never learned to play." Father Brown tilted his head slightly. "And yet you wear mourning well." Her eyes narrowed, not angrily, more like recognition. "Don't mistake me for a grieving wife, Father. I'm a woman who lost something, but not a man." He said nothing. Silence, he'd long learned, was not absence, but invitation. "I want you to find out who killed him," she continued. "You'll do it quietly. No fanfare. No headlines." "You mean no police?" Her smile curved like a secret. "I mean I've seen what happens when you bring rats into a burning house." Father Brown took a breath, so subtle it didn't move his shoulders. "Do you believe this is about money?" She hesitated. "No, not entirely. Tom had enemies, but he also had secrets. He was afraid of something, but he wouldn't say. Just locked himself in his study and prayed in the dark. He wasn't a man who prayed often." "And you?" "I prayed for patience," she said coolly. "But I'm all out." She left a card. No address, no phone, just her name embossed in silver and a time. Tonight, midnight, dusk. Manor. The manor sat like a mausoleum at the edge of the city, framed by willows and the kind of wrought-iron fence that says don't ask questions unless you brought a shovel. Father Brown arrived early, just as the moon began to lose its shine to fog. The house was lit from within, just one room, high in the east wing. He rang the bell. No answer. The front door, however, creaked open with too little resistance. Inside it smelled like old perfume and older books, the kind of scent memory tries to bury but never quite succeeds. He moved quietly through the foyer, past a grand piano gathering dust and portraits that watched too closely. Upstairs, the study door stood ajar. Lenora was there, but not waiting. She was slumped across the writing desk, head down, hand outstretched toward a half-written letter. A trail of blood ran from her shoulder to the floor, like punctuation at the end of her story. Father Brown stepped forward, gently checking her. Pulse, still warm, but gone. He read the letter. To whoever finds this, I only wanted the truth. I never meant to fall in love with a man who didn't trust me. The ledger is hidden in the confession booth. Saint Aloysius. Tell Father Brown I wore midnight for a reason. There was a sound behind him. Soft, deliberate. The click of a shoe against marble. He didn't turn, just waited. You move quiet for a priest. Father Brown smiled faintly. You move loud for a killer. Detective Harrow stepped into view, gun drawn, coat collar turned up, like a man trying to vanish into his own guilt. What were you doing here, Brown? Answering a knock. She call you? She died asking the right question. Harrow's grip tightened. You think I did this? No, Father Brown said. I think you knew it would happen. Harrow's jaw clenched. She was playing both sides. You know that, right? Lenora had dirt on Cutter, on Moxley, on half the underworld. She was bleeding them all dry. When Tom changed the will, she made a deal to get it reversed. But the price was blood. She thought truth would be payment enough, Father Brown said softly. But she forgot what kind of men she was bargaining with. Harrow stepped closer. What do you know about the confession booth? Enough to know someone else knocked before she did. They stared at each other. Rain hammered against the manor's windows like fists on a coffin. Let me take the letter, Harrow said. No, I can make you disappear. You won't, Father Brown replied, because she named me. Harrow looked away first. Later, back at the church, Father Brown opened the confession booth and reached beneath the panel. A velvet box, locked. He opened it with the key Lenora had tucked into the letter. Inside, a photograph. Thomas Dusk, with a man half his age, their arms draped across each other like brothers, or something more forbidden in a world run by judgment. A second photo, burnt at the edges, showed Lenora with the same man, laughing. The truth wasn't about money. It was about betrayal. Lenora hadn't wanted revenge. She wanted to understand why a man who never looked at her fully had feared the world, finding out who he truly was. The will wasn't changed out of cruelty. It was penance, an attempt to protect someone from the past. But it hadn't worked, because sin clings harder than secrets. Father Brown placed the box into the church's crypt beneath stone and candlelight. Some truths were too sharp to leave in the open. As the bells rang in the next hour, he knelt, not in guilt, but in gratitude, for one more soul who tried, however crookedly, to find the light. And somewhere beyond the veil of rain, the city exhaled, not in peace, but in pause. Chapter 4. Smoke in the Bell Tower. The smoke curled above the church like a serpent, deciding whether to strike. From the alley behind St. Jude's, it looked almost holy, a soft trail rising from the bell tower against a purple sky, soaked in city neon. But Father Brown knew better than most that not all that rises is sacred. He set his umbrella against the wall and climbed the narrow steps inside, boots echoing through the spiral with the hollow rhythm of distant drums. Halfway up, he could already smell it, smoke that didn't come from incense or sanctity, but from something cheaper and far more dangerous. It was a slow, burning warning. He reached the belfry and found the source. A metal box, blackened and warped, half hidden beneath the steps. A rag stuffed into its opening still smoked. He snuffed it gently with a gloved hand and picked up what remained. Not a bomb, a message. Deliberate, loud in its silence. Inside, A scorched envelope. No address. No stamp. But someone had taken the time to write, in careful script, "You're ringing the wrong bells, Father." He didn't take it personally. Truth, when struck too hard, always makes noise. The day before, a man named Rourke had come to confession. He entered like smoke himself, sliding into the booth with the soft creak of an old hinge. He spoke slowly, nervously, hands twitching just beyond the lattice. "It's about a girl," he'd said, like it always was. "She's missing. Or hiding, depends who's asking." Father Brown had said nothing. Silence wasn't avoidance, it was invitation. "They say she took something," Rourke went on. "A ledger, a black one. Names, numbers, belonged to a guy named Vincent Marrow. You know the type. Nightclubs and funerals, same suit for both." Father Brown had known, not personally, but intimately. You learn to recognize sin like a familiar hymn. Rourke had swallowed hard. "I tried to help her. She thought she could run. But now Marrow thinks I know where she is." Father Brown had leaned forward, his voice soft. "And do you?" There had been a long pause. "If I did, would I be here?" Now, after the fire in the tower, Father Brown found Rourke again, just not alive. He was in the morgue, tagged at the toe and marked as a jumper off the cathedral's west wing. But Father Brown had seen Rourke's face in confession. It wasn't a face that leaned toward windows. It was one that leaned toward hope, however faint. He left the morgue with his coat collar up, not for warmth, but for thought. Rain had begun to fall again, soaking the streets and washing away the night's sins into the gutters. He headed for the only place that still lit up at midnight with the kind of glow that promised answers and delivered consequences: the parlor. The parlor wasn't a bar. It was a haven for the damned dressed in red velvet and shadow. You didn't go to drink, you went to forget, and if you stayed long enough, you did. He found her there, on stage, under blue lights. A woman in midnight silk, voice like smoke through keyholes. She didn't sing for applause. She sang like she owed someone a song, and the interest was due. When she finished, the room didn't clap. It just exhaled. She stepped down and found him already seated in a corner booth. "You're the priest," she said. "The one asking about Rourke." He nodded. "And you're the reason he's dead." She sat, without permission. "He wasn't supposed to help me. Just pass a message. He got greedy." "You mean he got scared?" Father Brown replied, "and tried to protect something he didn't understand." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded paper. "This is all that's left. The rest of the ledger's gone. Burned, maybe, or hidden, where even rats don't go." He took the paper. It was a list, not names, codes, initials, amounts, dates, like a confessional in shorthand. "I tried to give it to the police," she said. "But they laughed. Said unless I had video and a signed letter from God, I should go back to dancing." "And did you?" She looked at him hard. "Do I look like I've been dancing?" He said nothing. He didn't have to. "They'll come for it," she whispered. "For me. For you. If they think you're keeping it." "They already have," he said. They lit a fire in the bell tower. Her laugh was soft, but it shook. They always liked irony. "Tell me about Marrow," he said. She glanced at the bar, then leaned in. "Marrow owns half the silence in this city. Politicians, cops, even priests maybe. But not me," Father Brown said. "No," she admitted. "That's why I came." Later that night, After she vanished into the city mist, he walked the long route back to the church. He passed a man on the corner with eyes too alert and a coat too dry for the weather. A tale, amateur, probably sent by Marrow's people to watch the priest who didn't stay where he was told. Father Brown didn't confront him. Some men need time to realize they've already been found. Back at the church, he hid the paper inside the altar's base, beneath a layer of old sermons and candle wax. It would be safe there, for a time. But by morning, the church door was splintered, and a man lay face down on the pew, blood pooling under his chin. Not a parishioner. A message. The paper was gone. Harrow showed up an hour later, hat in hand, not in apology, but in warning. "They're cleaning house, Brown. Anyone tied to that ledger's got hours, not days." "And you?" "I'm not here," Harrow said. "Never was." "Rourke was murdered," Father Brown said. "You called it a suicide." "Because that's what the file says, and I'm not paid to rewrite fiction." "No," Father Brown said softly, "just to make it rhyme." Harrow flinched and left. That night, the woman in midnight returned. Her name was Cora, not a stage name, the kind mothers whisper with regret and old perfume. "They took the rest," she said. "Marrow knows you had it." "I never had it," Father Brown replied. "Only the burden it left behind." Cora sat in the front pew, hands clasped. "Do you believe in penance?" "I believe in its price." "Then you should know," she whispered. "I'm the reason Rourke went to you." "I suspected," he said gently. "I told him to go because I knew he'd be followed. And I knew you'd listen. You used him." "I had to." "No one has to," Father Brown said. "That's what makes sin different from crime." There was a long silence. Then a click. The tail from the alley stepped into the aisle, gun drawn, face unreadable. "You talk too much, Padre," he said. "Not enough," Father Brown replied. "Or more men would have turned around by now." Cora stood slowly. "This isn't what we agreed," the gunman sneered. "Marrow changed the deal, said to clean it up." Cora turned to Father Brown. "I didn't know." "Yes, you did," he said. The gunman stepped forward. "Before you fire," Father Brown said, "ask yourself if the man who sent you ever planned to let you leave either." The pause was short, but it was enough. The man's hand trembled just once. But it was the first honest thing he'd done. "Run," Cora said. But he didn't. He just walked out, slower than a man in a hurry, but faster than a man at peace. When the church fell silent again, Father Brown looked at Cora. "You knew this would end here." "I hoped it wouldn't." "You hoped you'd be forgiven without confessing," he said. She wept then. Not loudly, just enough to be real. In the days that followed, Marrow's house was raided, not by police, but by accountants with subpoenas and no mercy. The city papers printed partial lists of donors, bribes, payoffs. They never mentioned the church, or the fire in the tower, or the girl in midnight. Cora disappeared. Some said she boarded a train east. Some said she vanished into smoke. Father Brown never said. But sometimes, when he climbed the belfry and rang the old bell, he thought about her voice, how it had filled the parlor like incense, and how sometimes the loudest cries come from the quietest places, because in the end, the fire had not consumed the truth. It had only signaled its arrival. Chapter 5. The Diary That Lied Twice. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It poured like judgment from a heaven too tired to whisper, turning gutters into rivers and back alleys into graves. Most people stayed inside, huddled beneath leaky roofs with their regrets and gin. But Father Brown walked the streets like a man who had never learned to fear the dark. His cassock clung to his knees, and the brim of his hat sagged under the weight of the water. But he walked steadily, one step at a time, as if each footfall was a prayer for the lost. He found the girl in the vestibule of St. Bartholomew's, curled on a pew like a broken rosary. Her coat was velvet, black as gilt, and her hands were wrapped around a book the size of a man's sin. She didn't look up when he entered, just kept whispering something under her breath, words that might have once been names. Father Brown knelt beside her. "You've come far," he said gently. She turned her head, eyes rimmed, red, mascara, running in threads like blood down porcelain. "He's gone," she whispered. "Who?" "David. He said if anything happened to him, to bring this here." She held up the book, trembling. "He said you'd understand." Father Brown took the diary with care. Its leather was cracked, waterlogged, but still whole. He thumbed through it in silence, scanning entries in hurried cursive, names, dates, symbols he knew belonged to people who didn't like the light. Did he say what was in it? "No," she said. "Only that it was dangerous. That it told the truth." Father Brown nodded. "Truth often is." She looked at him with that haunted, hungry gaze people wore when they'd seen something they wished they hadn't. "Do you believe in redemption?" "I do," he said, "but it's never earned cheaply." She tried to smile, but it died on her lips. "I didn't know where else to go." "You came to the right place," he said softly, "even if it was for the wrong reasons." She flinched, almost imperceptibly. He tucked the diary beneath his coat. "What's your name?" "Eliza." "And what aren't you telling me, Eliza?" She blinked. "Nothing. I just want David back." Father Brown stood. "Then help me find out why he's gone." The diary was a liar. It claimed to tell the truth, but Father Brown knew better than to trust words simply because they were written down. He spent the next day poring over it beneath the light of a single lamp in the rectory, while thunder muttered outside like a warning. Every entry painted a picture of a man drowning in secrets, David Vexley, accountant to the rich and wicked, who kept their ledgers clean while documenting their sins in private. He wrote names with care, but the dates, those were off. One in particular, the death of Jonah Bryce, noted 3 days before the official report. Another line described a meeting that could not have happened, because the man listed had been in police custody that week. A diary that lied once was troubling, but twice, that was dangerous. Father Brown took the pages to the one man who knew how liars breathed. Harrow, the city's least reluctant detective and most reluctant confessor. "You're back," Harrow said, feet on the desk, cigarette dangling like a bad idea he hadn't chewed long enough. "You only come when things bleed." Father Brown set the diary down. "It's bleeding enough for both of us." Harrow flipped through it, muttering, "So, another scandal book. These things show up once a year. Some pencil-neck clerk thinks he's got the dirt, so he writes it down. Then someone buries it, and him." "It's not just dirt," Father Brown said. "It's an invitation." Harrow grunted. "To what?" "To kill the man who wrote it." "Vexley's dead?" "Disappeared," Father Brown said. "But you and I both know that's a temporary condition in this city." Harrow stubbed out the cigarette. "What do you want?" "Names," Father Brown said. "Not the ones in the book. the ones it's not brave enough to mention. Harrow hesitated. Why do you care? Because Eliza's crying in a pew, and no man writes a false date unless he wants someone to find it. Harrow passed the book back. You're playing a game with knives, Brown. You don't carry one. No, Father Brown said quietly, but I've buried men who do. The next step took him to a place that smelled like old money and newer lies. The Orchid Club, where the flowers were, always red, and the bills never had faces. He found Eliza there, dressed in the same velvet coat, sipping something clear from a glass meant to distract, not satisfy. She was talking to a man in a grey suit, with a voice like sandpaper and hands that never stopped moving. When she saw Father Brown, her eyes flicked wide. I told you not to come here, she whispered when he sat beside her. You didn't, he said, which told me more. The man in grey narrowed his eyes. This, the priest? I've been called worse, Father Brown said. You brought the diary? No, the man smiled. Then this is a short conversation. Father Brown leaned in, voice low. Tell me, did David know about the fake entries before or after he wrote them? The smile vanished. What are you saying? I'm saying your hands never stop moving because you're used to pulling strings. You fed him false information, watched him write it, then waited for someone to notice. You can't prove that. I don't have to. The lie is already doing your job for you. The man stood. You're making enemies. I always do when I tell the truth. That night, Father Brown walked Eliza home, through streets that glowed orange under the flicker of bad wiring and worse intentions. She said little until they reached the door. You think I lied to you, she said. I think you believed what you needed to. You're not angry. No, he said. You're not the first to use faith as a shield. But shields crack. She looked away. David trusted me. Then honor that trust, he said. Tell me what really happened. Tears welled up again. They threatened him. Said if he didn't write what they told him, they'd come for me. For his sister. He didn't even hesitate. He made it all up. But he left the wrong date on purpose. Said if anyone found it, they'd know he wanted out. And now he's gone. And I have a key to a safe deposit box he told me never to open unless someone like you asked for it. She handed him the key. It was small, gold, stamped with a number that sang like a hymn in a whisper. By morning, he stood inside the vault room of Westbridge Savings, holding a box that rattled when shaken. Inside, more pages, the real ones, and a letter. Father Brown, if you're reading this, I've likely disappeared. I don't know who I can trust. Maybe not even Eliza, but if she brought you this, it means I was wrong about her. Use what's in here, not for justice, for mercy. The pages painted a different story, not just corruption, but penance. Names of men trying to atone in quiet, trying to leave, and the ones who wouldn't let them. Father Brown delivered copies to Harrow, who read them with the weariness of a man who's already tired of what comes next. So what now? Harrow asked. Now we bury the lies, Father Brown said, and plant something true in their place. Eliza didn't return to the Orchid Club. She vanished, maybe to another city, or maybe just far enough away to not be found by memory. But sometimes Father Brown thought of her when the pews were empty and the candles burned low. A girl wrapped in velvet, clutching a book full of lies, praying for a truth she could live with. And in the end, that's what they all wanted. A truth that didn't kill. Chapter 6. A Candle for the Dead. The first call came just after Matins, when the city was still coughing out last night's sins. The church windows wept condensation, and the pews sat empty except for the ghosts of prayers half finished. Father Brown was lighting candles when the door creaked open, and a boy, no older than 12, slipped in, wet to the bone, his eyes darting like a mouse that had lived too long near traps. He handed over a note. No name, no address, only a sentence scrawled in jagged ink. Light a candle for Dorian Quinn. They'll tell you he died of guilt. He didn't. The boy didn't wait for a blessing. He was gone before the note finished trembling in the priest's hand. Dorian Quinn had been the kind of man who ran a room by leaning against its darkest wall. He owned 2 speakeasies, a high-stakes poker den, and at least 4 men's debts, 2 of them in uniforms. Officially, he'd been dead for 3 days. Suicide, said the police, drove his Packard into the river, doors locked, pockets full of stones, like some kind of gangster Ophelia. But Father Brown didn't believe in neat exits, and he especially didn't believe in sudden remorse from men who'd made peace with their demons years ago. By noon, the fog had slunk back into the alleys, and the city coughed up its next clue. A woman in a veil stepped into the confessional. Her perfume arrived first, sharp, expensive, laced with something desperate. She sat down, without ceremony. Her voice low and polished like a knife in evening gloves. "Forgive me, Father, for I have lied." I told them. Dorian jumped. "And what do you believe?" Father Brown asked gently. "That he was murdered," she said, "but not for what he did, for what he tried not to do." He waited. "They wanted him to sign something. He wouldn't. He said he was done making people disappear, that he was going to talk to you." "Did he?" She hesitated. "I don't know. I saw him that night. He was—" Her voice trembled. "He looked tired. Tired of hiding. And now you're hiding. They think I know something. Maybe I do. Maybe I'm next. What's your name?" "I didn't come for absolution," she said. "No," Father Brown said calmly. "You came for safety, but you'll leave with truth." She was gone before he could ask more, but she left something behind. A smear of crimson lipstick on the screen's edge. A small, silent signature. That evening, Father Brown visited the docks where Quinn's car had been pulled. The water still stank of oil and regret. He found a man there with a bent back and calloused hands, one of the divers who'd pulled the body. The man wouldn't talk at first. Then Father Brown mentioned the name Dorian Quinn, and something inside the diver softened, like a rotted beam, finally giving way. "Didn't look like a man who wanted to die," he muttered. He was buckled in, but there were marks on his wrists, rope burns. Whoever sent him down there made sure he didn't fight it. Father Brown nodded. "And the police?" "Signed off before the water dried on his boots." The priest thanked him and slipped into the shadows, boots echoing through puddles thick as memory. The city wasn't designed for men like Dorian Quinn to die quietly. It wasn't designed for priests to ask questions either. The next name came from an old ledger found tucked behind the altar's loose stone, right where the sacramental wine was kept. A manila envelope with a single page, Quinn's will, unsigned, and a name beneath the beneficiary line, Isadora Vale, the woman in the confessional. Father Brown found her at the old opera house, seated in the upper balcony where the city's elite once applauded other people's pain. She didn't run when he arrived, just turned, slowly, like she'd been expecting him all along. You know now, she said. I know more than I did, he answered. I know Dorian left everything to you, and that's why he died. She looked away. I told him not to put me in the will. I told him they'd never let it stand. Who are they? She didn't answer, but her silence formed a shape, one with expensive shoes and sharper appetites. Father Brown leaned closer. You tried to lie for him, and now you're trying to disappear for him. I owe him that, she whispered. He saved me. Then let me help finish what he started. She handed him a small key. The last thing he gave me said it opened something important, but not to use it unless I was ready to stop running. Father Brown took it with care. And are you? I don't know, she said, but I know I'm tired. The key opened a safety box in a downtown bank, the kind with marbled floors and guards who looked the other way if your pockets jangled loud enough. Inside was a single reel of film. No label, no instructions, just celluloid that whispered danger when it moved. Father Brown watched it in the rectory with the old projector kept for catechism lessons. What flickered on screen wasn't holy. It was a meeting. Dimly lit, grainy, but unmistakable. Quinn. Two men in suits, one a councilman, the other a bishop. Money exchanged, papers signed. A girl led in, young, barely out of childhood. The film ended before the worst of it could be shown, but not before it could be known. Father Brown sat for a long time afterward, the hum of the machine blending with his heartbeat. He knew now what Quinn had tried to do, and why they'd stopped him. The confrontation came quickly. He returned to the church that night to find it unlocked, candles scattered, and a man waiting in the shadows. You've been busy, Father, the man said, voice like gravel soaked in whiskey. His coat bulged where a gun didn't bother to hide. I've been lighting candles, Father Brown said softly, for the dead and for the dying. The man chuckled. You're not as dumb as they say. They rarely say enough. We know you have the film, and you know what's on it. That's why we can't let it out. Father Brown didn't move. You already killed one man to keep it silent. Quinn had a choice. No, Father Brown said. He had a conscience. The man stepped closer. Last chance, priest. Father Brown tilted his head. Are you confessing? The man blinked. What? You came into a church, stood by the altar, and admitted to a crime. That sounds like a confession. Then let me offer you penance, Father Brown said, stepping past him. The film's already with the papers, but I'll tell them you tried to stop it. The man didn't shoot. Something in the priest's tone made him feel smaller than his pistol. He left without speaking, swallowed by the city's endless corridors. By dawn, the reel had run in every press office from uptown to the bay. Names were named, faces shown, protests began, arrests followed, the bishop resigned, the councilman vanished. No one asked where Father Brown got the film. No one dared. He returned to St. Bartholomew's and lit another candle. For Dorian, for the girl, for the sins that stained holy hands. A week later, Isadora returned. Her veil gone, her smile faint but real. You did it, she said. No, Father Brown replied. Truth did. Will they come for you? They always do. Are you afraid? Yes, he said, but I carry more than fear. She sat beside him as the candles flickered and the city, for a moment, held its breath. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It simply burns. Chapter 7. The Choir Boy. vanished at vespers. The rain had been falling since noon, a slow, insistent drizzle that made the city shine like a lie too polished to trust. It smeared the neon signs across wet windows, turned alleys into mirror traps, and made even the sharpest boots feel unsure beneath your feet. At St. Dismas, on 9th and Mercer, the bells rang for vespers, as they always did, soft and mournful, as if they knew too much. But that night, one voice was missing from the choir. Tommy Burke, age 11, vanished between the second reading and the final hymn. One moment, he was standing beside the other boys in his white robe, eyes upturned toward heaven, voice clear as morning glass. The next, he was gone. No one saw him leave. No one heard a scream. No doors creaked. No footsteps echoed. Just silence. And then that silence became a hole too wide to ignore. By the time Father Brown was summoned, the church had emptied, and the sacristan stood, wringing his hands like a man trying to dry them on guilt. "He was here," the old man whispered. "He was just here. I gave him his robe myself. He tied it wrong, always too loose, and I fixed it like I always do. And then, nothing." Father Brown looked around the sacristy, his eyes sweeping past the hanging robes, the extinguished candles, the forgotten incense. "Nothing," he repeated, his voice even. "It's never nothing. Children don't vanish. They are taken, or they run. Either way, it leaves footprints, just not always the kind that stain." He stepped into the nave, the stained glass now cast in monochrome by the storm outside. He walked the aisle slowly, eyes resting on the places where light failed to reach. The corners behind confessionals, the shadow beneath the organ loft, the back pew where the drunk sometimes slept. He paused near the choir's row, knelt, and picked something up. A ribbon, torn, silk. Not part of a choir robe, but familiar, expensive. By midnight, the police were involved, though only half-heartedly. Missing street kids weren't a novelty, even ones who could sing Latin. Detective Harrow showed up long enough to wave off any real search. "Probably ran off," he said, lighting a cigarette he didn't enjoy. "These choir types get a taste of freedom and think they're Bing Crosby. He'll turn up. He'll turn up dead if we don't act," Father Brown said, quietly but firmly. Harrow exhaled smoke through his nose. "You know something I don't? Only that sin walks quieter than reason, and it wears better shoes." Harrow didn't laugh. He walked off, muttering about priests and ghost stories. But Father Brown had already seen the next clue. It was in the bulletin board by the narthex, pinned between notices for bake sales and lost rosaries, a flyer for the sacred song competition. Cash prize, sponsored by a private donor, no name listed, just an address. Northwood Hall, this Friday. The place had been closed for years, supposedly undergoing renovations. Father Brown visited it the next day. He wore his old brown coat, the one with the hidden pocket, and his plainest collar. The hall stood empty at street level, but he circled the block and found a back entrance propped open with a broken mop. Inside, the smell of mold and varnish hit him like a memory. The main floor was dusty and dark, but the piano was freshly tuned. He knew that sound. He'd been a parish priest long enough to know what a room looked like when someone was trying to make it sing again. On the second floor, he found a door marked "Private, No Entry." He knocked, once, twice, then opened it anyway. She was there, in a red dress that didn't care what time it was, lounging against a chaise with a cigarette in one hand and a look that said she was 3 moves ahead of the game. Her hair was pinned back sharp as scripture, and her eyes were the kind that knew too many endings. "You're either lost," she said, "or you're the man they said would come sniffing around." "I've been called worse," Father Brown replied. She tilted her head. "You don't look like a priest. I've found the collar's only useful when people want to lie." She took a long drag. "You're looking for the choir boy." "I am. He's not here." "I didn't say he was, but something of him is." She flicked ash into a dish that was too clean. "You think I had something to do with it?" "I think you have something to do with many things. But today, I'm only asking about Tommy Burke." She didn't flinch, but her fingers tensed slightly on the cigarette. "He had a voice," she said. "A real one. Not like those studio-trained brats. This one, it made you believe in angels again. Even the devil was an angel once." That got a smile. "You've got fire, Father. That's rare. You're not the first to say that before repenting." "Who said I want to repent?" "No one, Father," Brown said, rising. "But the night hasn't ended yet." He left her there, in the silence she wore like perfume. But he didn't go far. Just around the corner, where he could see who else came in and out. By dusk, a man arrived. Tall, clean-shaven, the kind of suit that made guilt look expensive. He spoke to the woman in low tones. She laughed once, then handed him an envelope. He pocketed it and left. Father Brown followed. The man didn't go far, just 3 blocks down, to a building marked St. Jude's Children's Trust. A front, obviously. No real signage, no children, just names and paper. Father Brown waited until night fell, then entered through the side. Inside was paperwork, stacked high and dry. Donations, transfers, sponsorships. One name kept appearing: Gerard Lasky, former councilman, current ghost. Rumor had it he disappeared after the mayor's scandal. But here he was again, giving to the choir, to the church, to anyone willing to look the other way. Father Brown didn't look away. He took the files to Harrow. This time, the detective listened. Maybe it was the mood. Maybe it was the priest's quiet certainty. Maybe it was the photo tucked into one file. Lasky and Tommy, arm on shoulder, both smiling. A private lesson. A mentorship. Dated 3 days before the boy disappeared. "Damn it," Harrow muttered. "Where is he?" "Where you keep things you don't want others to hear," Father Brown said. "Somewhere quiet. Somewhere with acoustics." They found the boy in the old bell tower behind Northwood Hall, locked in a storage chamber, bruised but breathing, too weak to cry, but alive. He clung to Father Brown like a lifeline and wouldn't let go until dawn. Lasky disappeared again. The woman in red vanished with him. The papers wrote about a kidnapping scandal, but not the kind of truth that burns clean, just enough to sell. The boy recovered, slowly. He no longer sang quite the same, but he came back to church, sat in the front row, watched Father Brown light candles one by one. And when the choir sang again at Vespers, one voice was missing, but not from absence, just from change. Because even angels, once wounded, sing lower. And sometimes, that's how you know they're real. Chapter 8. The lock wasn't forced. It was a still night, the kind that made the city feel like it had stopped breathing. Rain had come and gone, like a visitor who didn't stay long enough to be questioned, leaving behind a sheen on the pavement and the faint smell of rust. The alleys were quiet, windows closed, bars emptying one soul at a time. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone cried out like it knew something nobody would admit. And beneath all that, a silence that didn't belong. That was the first thing Father Brown noticed as he stepped inside the rectory at St. Dominic's just after midnight. The candles had all burned out, but the door to the vestry was open. That door never stayed open, not without reason. They found the body of Mrs. Camber the next morning, crumpled beside the offering box, with her hands folded neatly and a bloodstain spreading across the tiled floor like a shadow that refused to stay put. She'd come to polish the brass, same as every Thursday. Only this Thursday, someone had met her early. Her bag was missing, her wedding ring still on. Her glasses sat beside her on the bench, unbroken. Nothing else was disturbed. The police said robbery gone wrong. But Father Brown looked at the doorknob, smeared with thumbprint grease, at the candle wick beside her left shoe that hadn't been burned, and simply said, "The lock wasn't forced." Detective Harrow grunted, flicking his cigarette at the sidewalk. "You saying she let her killer in?" "I'm saying she wasn't afraid to." "Then maybe it was someone she knew, or someone she was told to trust." The church was sealed off, yellow tape stretching across the entrance like the kind of cross that offered no salvation. Father Brown stood behind it with his hands in his sleeves, eyes scanning the rain-dark stones and brass hinges, thinking of Mrs. Camber's crooked smile and the way she always hummed Ave Maria off-key. She hadn't deserved this. But then, again, neither had most of the city. By afternoon, the whispers started. People said she'd found something, a note, a name, something slipped under the door 2 nights ago. A parishioner claimed she'd seen Mrs. Camber reading from a notebook during Mass, mouth moving, but not in prayer. And when Father Brown asked the sacristan, an old man with shaking hands and bad memories, he muttered, "She said the money box was heavier than usual. Said someone was using it wrong. Said she'd tell the father. But she never did." That evening, a woman appeared outside the church steps just as the last light of day curled behind the rooftops. She wore a black coat, a blue scarf knotted too tight, and eyes that shimmered with the kind of sadness that comes after guilt, not before. She lit a cigarette, saw Father Brown watching her, and crossed the street like someone who didn't believe in hesitation. "You're the priest," she said. "I've been accused of that." "My name's Lillian Royce. I was a friend of Anna Camber. I'm sorry for your loss." "Don't be," she warned me. "I just didn't believe her." Father Brown tilted his head. "Warned you of what?" She hesitated. "She said someone was moving cash through the church, that the donations were being used to launder money. Said she was going to confront whoever was behind it." "And did she say who that was?" "She didn't have to," Lillian said, her voice a whisper now. "There's only one man who controls this neighborhood, and he doesn't let anyone touch the plate unless he says so." "Vincent Duval." She nodded. "He's got the cops, the council, even the choir director in his pocket." Anna thought the church could still be sacred, that it was safe. Father Brown looked toward the closed doors. She thought wrong. The next day, he visited Duval's club, La Lune Rouge. Velvet curtains, liquor that smelled of regret, women who danced like they were trying to forget what they'd done to survive. Duval sat in a booth at the back, surrounded by silence and bodyguards, his fingers heavy with rings and threats. "You've got nerve," he said, as Father Brown approached. "I've always had faith," Brown replied. Duval poured himself a drink. "If you're here about Anna Camber, save your breath. tragic. What happened? She didn't think it was tragedy. She thought it was accounting. Duval smiled faintly. A little old woman, please. She found something she wasn't meant to, and someone made sure she wouldn't share it. Duval's expression didn't change. You priests, always seeing sin in the shadows. Because that's where it hides, Father Brown said, when the light's too bright. He left without incident, but he'd seen what he needed. The ledger open beside Duval's elbow, the initials a C, scribbled in the margin, and a symbol he'd seen before, drawn on the side of the offering box in the sacristy. A mark, a signal, something quiet enough to pass as harmless unless you knew what to look for. That night, someone broke into the rectory. They didn't take anything, but they left behind a single candle, lit and standing in the middle of the floor. The wick burned low, but it burned long enough to carry a message. Father Brown stared at it for an hour. He knew now it wasn't just about money, it was about control. Anna had stumbled on more than embezzlement. She'd uncovered a ledger of sins, a list of names, payoffs, and confessions twisted into currency. Someone inside the church was helping Duval keep that list safe. Someone with keys. So he returned to the place no one ever looked, the confessionals. He opened the third booth, the one unused for decades, and found a false panel behind the seat. Inside, a journal. Anna's handwriting, dates, times, names, donations that didn't match the records, letters passed through hands that never made it to the pulpit, and a final entry. If anything happens to me, it won't be theft. It'll be silence. Tell Father Brown the lock wasn't forced. He was still reading when the footsteps came. You were supposed to leave this alone. The voice belonged to a man in robes, tall, familiar, the choir director. You were in charge of the offering schedules, Father Brown said, without looking up. And the keys? She trusted you. She should have stayed out of it. She tried, Father Brown said, but conscience is louder than fear. The man raised something, heavy, metal, a candle holder. She was your friend, Father Brown said. She prayed for you, even after she knew. The hesitation was brief, but it was enough. The candle holder dropped to the ground. I didn't mean to kill her, the man whispered. But you did, Father Brown said, because you thought the truth could be locked away. The police took him away before sunrise. Duval wasn't touched, not yet, but the church no longer sang his praises. The choir director confessed to everything, and the journal made its way into Harrow's hands. I'll do what I can, Harrow said, but Duval's got friends. Then tell his friends the lock wasn't forced, Father Brown said. It was opened from the inside. On Sunday, the church was full again, not with faithful, but with people who needed a reason to hope. And when Father Brown lit the candles for Mass, he placed one in front of Anna Camber's name, a light for the one who knew truth still burns, even when it flickers. Chapter 9. Footprints Beyond the Chapel Wall. It began the way most ugly truths do, with something too small to notice until it was too big to ignore. The chapel was locked, as it always was after dusk. The sky outside St. Bridget's was dipped in bruised violet, and the street lamps cast halos through the fog that curled like cigarette smoke from the mouths of tired buildings. Inside, the air still held the scent of incense and old regret. Father Brown was the last to leave, extinguishing the candles one by one, offering a final prayer beneath his breath when something stopped him cold. A scuffed trail of mud at the base of the north wall. Not much, just 4 prints, barely visible, leading toward the brick behind the altar, then disappearing entirely. The floor had just been swept that afternoon. The door had been locked, and the prints were too small to belong to a man. Father Brown knelt. The pattern wasn't from a boot or a grown heel. It was a child's shoe, maybe size 4. He reached for his coat. The air in the church had gone suddenly still, as though it were listening. By morning, the city had its newest secret. A boy, missing from the orphanage down on Vinton Street. A quiet thing, 11, barely spoke. Not the kind of child anyone noticed in a crowd, but he was noticed now, missing without a trace, last seen sweeping the chapel stairs before supper. Sister Meridine, a woman whose sternness could cut glass, said he had no friends, no enemies, no reason to run. They always have a reason, Father Brown said, eyes on the chapel wall. Detective Harrow arrived half an hour later, trenchcoat still soaked from the drizzle, temper sharper than usual. You dragging me out for footprints now? They lead nowhere, Father Brown said. That's called a dead end. It's called a message, Father Brown corrected. Harrow exhaled. Any suspects? None. Just a feeling. I don't work off feelings. No, said Father Brown, but killers do. That afternoon, the Mother Superior unlocked the chapel for them. It wasn't until Father Brown traced his fingers along the wall behind the altar that he heard it, the faint, hollow thud of plaster over wood. It wasn't a wall. It was a door, long sealed and forgotten. Harrow knocked once, twice. The third knock gave in. Behind it, a narrow crawl space descended into the old stone foundation of the church. Dust rose like memory. The prints continued deeper. They found the hideaway a few meters in. A cot, a tin plate, a child's coat, and beside it, something far more telling. Cigarette butts. Not the kind a child would smoke. The good kind, expensive, burned halfway, as if left in a hurry. Father Brown stared down at them. He wasn't hiding, he murmured. He was being hidden. Harrow was already on his radio, calling in backup. The story unraveled like a noose after that. A woman came to the rectory the next evening, tall, pale, with gloves that matched her wine-colored dress and a voice like velvet soaked in gin. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. Father Brown had seen enough late-night visitors to know a performance when he heard one. I heard you're looking for the boy, she said, taking the chair across from him. We are. I might know something, but you won't say it without leverage. She smiled. Let's not pretend, Father. I'm here because I think you want the same thing I do. And what's that? Balance. Justice has many names, Father Brown replied, but balance isn't one of them. Call it what you like, she said, drawing a small envelope from her coat. There's a man, visits the chapel every Thursday, leaves through the side door, says prayers no one hears. The boy watched him once, told me he wasn't really praying. Who is he? A city man. Clean shoes, quiet laugh. He pays well for silence. You took his money, I took what I needed. And the boy? Asked questions. And paid for it. She didn't answer. Why tell me this now? Because the money stopped, she said, and the fear hasn't. Father Brown took the envelope. Inside, a photograph. Black and white. Faded. A man in a suit, handing something to a boy behind the chapel. The man's face obscured. The boy's wasn't. You don't care what happens to the man, Father Brown said. I care about sleeping again. As she left, Harrow entered. "Who is that?" "Someone who made a bad deal and wants me to fix it." Harrow studied the photo. "I know him. Councilman Bray." "He's the one?" "He's the one." Father Brown stared down at the image. "We'll need more than this." They found Bray at his club 3 nights later, surrounded by smoke and distraction. Harrow went in through the front. Father Brown slipped through the back, where old ghosts kept better company. They met him in the private lounge. Low lighting, long shadows, polished glasses. "Gentlemen," Bray said, rising like a host at his own trial. "Councilman," Harrow said, flashing his badge. "I assume this is about the chapel." "No," said Father Brown. "It's about the boy." Bray's hand tightened on the decanter. "What boy?" "Don't," Harrow said. Bray sat down slowly. "You can't prove anything." "But you can confess," Father Brown said, "and you might still walk away with a soul." Bray laughed. "A hollow thing. You think this is about sin?" "I think it always is." Bray leaned forward. "He followed me. That's all. Got too close. I never laid a hand on him." "But someone did," Harrow said. Bray's jaw set. "I paid the woman to keep him out of sight. Safe. She was supposed to send him to the convent across town. Get him out of the city." "You paid her to erase him," Father Brown said. "No," Bray whispered, "to protect myself." There it was. Not guilt. Fear. They took Bray in. The woman vanished before the warrant reached her apartment. But the boy was found that same night, sleeping in the old tunnel beneath the schoolyard, curled beneath his coat, like it was the only truth he had left. Father Brown sat beside him, neither speaking for a long time. Then the boy asked, "Did I do wrong?" "No," Father Brown said. "You just asked a question they weren't ready to answer." On Sunday, the chapel reopened. The prints on the floor were gone, but Father Brown still saw them, pressed deep into memory, leading to the place where men hide their worst. Beyond the chapel wall. Chapter 10. A Prayer for the Guilty. The rain came down sideways that night, slicing across the city like a confession denied too long. Gutters overflowed, street lamps flickered, steam curled from sewer grates, coiling into the shapes of things better left forgotten. Somewhere beyond the neon haze of 42nd Street, a man was found, face down in the mud behind a shuttered parish, a rosary wound so tight around his neck it left beaded impressions even after they'd cut him loose. The cops called it a robbery. Detective Harrow called it a favor to silence. But Father Brown, standing there in the alley with rain trickling down the brim of his hat and pooling at his feet, called it what it was, a prayer never said. The man's name was Dominic Bell, 47, former bookkeeper for St. Adalbert's, widower, no children, but plenty of enemies. He was the kind of man who never lied on paper, but lied plenty in the pews. Every Thursday, like clockwork, he'd sit in the last row with a Bible he never opened and lips that never moved. Father Brown had watched him often, trying to decide whether the silence was guilt or stubbornness. Now it didn't matter. The silence had been made permanent. The curious thing, besides the method of death, was the rosary. It wasn't Bell's. Father Brown had seen his once, a cheap plastic strand with a cracked crucifix. The one wrapped around his throat was silver, delicate, worn at the edges, like it had been passed through generations. It had belonged to someone else, someone older, someone faithful. The beads glistened like tears in the rain. Father Brown walked back to the rectory with the quiet determination of a man dragging a heavy thought behind him. When he arrived, a woman was waiting. Young, mid-30s, dark lipstick despite the hour, gloves too fine for the weather. She leaned against the doorframe like she owned it. "You're the priest," she said. Her voice was smoke dipped in. "Satin." "I'm a priest," Father Brown replied. "Dominic Bell was my uncle." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." "You didn't like him?" "I didn't know him." "Not really. He never let anyone in." "He was scared." "Of what?" She pulled a folded envelope from her coat. "This." He took it. Inside, a single page. Numbers. Bank codes. A name scrawled at the bottom. Harrow's. "I don't understand," he said, though he did. "My uncle kept the books," she said. "For the church, the schools, the wrong people. He knew too much, and when he stopped playing along—" "They reminded him," Father Brown finished. She nodded. "He said, if anything happened, I should bring that to you." "Why me?" "He said you weren't afraid to pray for the guilty." She turned to go. "Don't try to fix it, Father. Just make sure it's seen." He didn't ask her name. Some ghosts prefer to go unnamed. The next day, Father Brown paid Harrow a visit. The detective was nursing his third coffee and a headache the size of a grand jury. "You look like sin in a suit," Father Brown said, mildly. "I feel like it." He handed over the page. Harrow barely looked at it. "Where'd you get this?" "From a woman who believes her uncle was killed for having it." "This is nothing." "It's enough." Harrow stood. "You think I'm dirty?" "I think you're surrounded by dirt." "That's not the same." "No," said Father Brown, "but it's close enough to bury you if you're not careful." Harrow folded the page. Slowly. "You want me to investigate myself?" "No. I want you to find the truth, even if it hurts." "Truth always does." That night, someone broke into St. Adalbert's. Nothing was taken, but the ledger, the real one, the one Bell kept in his private drawer behind the altar, was burned. The fire was clean, contained, surgical. They'd wanted to erase just one thing. Father Brown stood in the smoke and ashes and knew this wasn't the end. It was the prologue. 2 nights later, a man knocked on the rectory door. Tall, broad shoulders, military haircut, eyes like winter roads. He said his name was Reeve. "I worked with Bell," he said. "Security, logistics, numbers. He wasn't a bad man, just a tired one." "He died scared." Reeve nodded. "He had reason. He said someone was watching. Not the gangsters. Someone inside. Inside the church. Inside the trust." Father Brown narrowed his eyes. "The trust?" Reeve leaned closer. "St. Adalbert's isn't just a parish. It's a holding cell. Funds get shuffled in, laundered, sent out clean. Bell handled the books. But the real power moved through someone else." "Who?" "Ask your bishop." Father Brown didn't flinch. "He confirmed Bell's death publicly." Reeve's mouth curled. "Of course he did. Easier to absolve a body than protect a soul." When Reeve left, he left behind a matchbook from a club called the Coronet, one of the old ones. Marble steps, velvet walls. A house band that played songs slow enough to forget your name. Father Brown went there just before midnight. The place smelled of gin and powdered lies. He found her in the corner, seated like a question no one dared ask. The same woman. The niece, or so she claimed. "You didn't say you were part of the trust," he said. "I didn't say a lot of things." "Then say this. Who killed Bell?" She sighed. You're thinking like a priest. That's all I've ever been. You want a name. There is no name. There's a system. Bell broke it. And the system doesn't like squeaks. You're part of it. Not anymore. Why leave? She looked away. Because he prayed for me. And I heard it. There was silence, thick, meaningful. Then she said, he told me once that sin isn't the worst thing. It's pretending you never committed one. You're confessing. I'm asking for mercy. Father Brown didn't answer. He just nodded. The next day, Harrow called him in. You were right, he said. The bishop signed off on fund transfers that don't exist. Bell had them all written down. Someone tried to burn the copies, but Bell mailed backups to you. Father Brown blinked. I never received them. They're probably in the system or someone's drawer, but they exist. What happens now? I bring it up the chain, quietly. No, Father Brown said. You bring it up loudly, or the chain keeps tightening. Harrow gritted his teeth. You don't understand. This could ruin people. No, said Father Brown. It might save them. The scandal broke 3 days later. The bishop stepped down. Harrow faced a review board, but walked clean. The trust dissolved. Most of the money disappeared into dust. And Bell, his grave, was visited. Quietly, often, by the same woman in gloves. One night, Father Brown approached her. You came back. I never left. Did he forgive you? I don't know. Then I will, he said. And, together, they lit a candle, not for the innocent, but for the ones who finally admitted they weren't. Chapter 11. He wrote the truth in disguise. The city was quieter than usual that night, not from peace, but from expectation, like the streets were holding their breath, waiting for something to go wrong. Fog slid over the asphalt in thick coils, licking at the alley mouths and swallowing the sound of footsteps. A busted neon sign above the old newsstand buzzed like a dying hornet, casting flickering light on the soaked pavement below. Somewhere in the distance, a saxophone howled at a moon that never showed its face. Father Brown moved through it all like a man walking a familiar path, a black silhouette drifting through grays and shadows, his coat damp and heavy from the mist. The note had been slipped beneath the rectory door, typed on a Remington, short and blunt. If you want the truth about the Brogan story, come to Bellamy House. Tonight, alone. The Brogan story. It had been the city's favorite scandal for weeks. A crusading columnist named Lawrence Brogan had vanished 2 days after printing a damning exposé on organized racketeering at the harbor. No body, no note, just a stiff breeze off the docks and a silence so sudden it rang in your ears. People said he'd skipped town or been paid to disappear, but Father Brown didn't believe in disappearing acts without a final confession. That wasn't how sin worked. When people vanished in this city, it was because someone wanted them forgotten, and forgetting took effort, real effort. Someone was always left behind to sweep the blood off the tiles. Bellamy House sat on a hill west of downtown, an old stone mansion that had been sold and repurchased so many times its mail still arrived in other people's names. It had once belonged to a judge, then to a silent film actress, and more recently to a shell corporation with no face. The doors were unlocked when Father Brown arrived. The air inside was stale, like it had been waiting with its arms crossed. A single light flickered at the end of the hall. Beneath it sat a typewriter, and beside the typewriter, a corpse. He didn't scream, didn't flinch. He'd seen enough bodies to know which deaths were final and which were performances. This one was real. The man was slumped over, his fingers still curled against the ribbon. Blood pooled beneath the chair and dragged in 3 directions, like someone had thought about moving him, but decided against it. A cigarette burned in an ashtray, untouched. On the floor, a sheet of paper torn from the machine read, "He wrote the truth in disguise." Father Brown stepped closer. The man was not Brogan. Thinner, younger, maybe 30. He had ink stains on his cuffs and a press pass in his pocket from the ledger. Faked, judging by the misspelled masthead. A decoy or a pawn, but not the author. This man had been copying someone else's story, and someone had come to stop him mid-paragraph. The sound came next, heels on tile, slow and measured. She emerged from the far end of the hallway with the elegance of a ghost, all angles and danger wrapped in satin. Her coat was red, her smile wasn't, and her eyes had the same heat as a barrel just after it fires. "You're not the police," she said. "I try not to be. I thought you'd be older." "I am." She stepped around the body like it was furniture, lighting a cigarette with a gold lighter. "So, Father, what brings you to this little wake?" "Someone invited me, though I don't think they made it." She exhaled smoke. That was Tommy Hale. Ambitious, dumb, easily bought, thought he could finish Brogan's story if he played brave. "And who were you in his story?" She smiled again. "The editor, off the record. Names have a habit of finding print. And priests have a habit of getting shot," she said sweetly. Father Brown looked at her cigarette. "You didn't smoke it." "Excuse me?" "The cigarette in the ashtray. Someone lit it, but they never smoked it. Lit for show, not habit. That's not yours." She blinked once. He continued. "Brogan vanished because he had something someone wanted buried. Tommy tried to resurface it, and someone didn't like the dredging. Are you accusing me of murder?" "I'm accusing you of editing." She stepped closer, the smile fading. "You don't understand this world, Father." Brogan was a fool. He thought if he dressed the truth up in metaphors, people would see past the headlines. But the ones with money don't read between the lines. They burn the paper. Father Brown nodded. "And you helped them burn it." "I helped survive." "There's a difference." She reached into her purse, pulled out a small cassette recorder, and set it on the desk beside the dead man. Brogan recorded everything, sent the tapes to someone he trusted. "I found this one 2 days ago, hidden behind the organ at St. Jude's." "Why give it to me?" "Because I'm tired. Because I'm next. Because maybe, just maybe, you'll do what he couldn't." She turned and vanished down the hallway. He didn't follow, just picked up the recorder and walked out into the rain. The tape played that night beneath the muted hum of a desk lamp. Brogan's voice was tired but sharp, the voice of a man who'd seen too much and knew he wouldn't get to say it twice. "They've bought the Port Authority, half the dock unions, the rest are scared. I've got names, dates, payoffs. They meet at a club called the Downstroke. Private room, blue wallpaper, only one entrance. If this tape gets out, it means I didn't make it. Tell Father Brown. He'll understand the rest. He always did." Father Brown sat back and closed his eyes. He did understand. Not just the crime, the sin. Brogan hadn't run. He'd gone to ground, hiding his truth like a relic waiting to be exhumed. The next night, Father Brown walked into the downstroke. He wasn't dressed like a priest, just a tired man in a black coat with mud on his cuffs. He asked for a table, ordered tea, waited. When the hostess turned her back, he slipped past the velvet rope and into the back hallway. Room with blue wallpaper. One entrance. The door was locked, but the keyhole glowed faintly. Inside, men sat around a table, littered with bills, cigars, and scotch. One of them was Councilman Dry. Another was the commissioner's nephew. And at the head, a man with too many rings and a voice like syrup, poured over poison. His name was Gallo, a fixer, the kind of man whose name never appeared in headlines, but who wrote every paragraph. Father Brown knocked once. "Occupied," Gallo called. Father Brown opened the door anyway. The silence was immediate. Half a dozen eyes turned toward him like gun barrels. "You're trespassing," Gallo said. "No," said Father Brown. "I'm delivering a eulogy." He placed the recorder on the table. Pressed play. Brogan's voice filled the room, crisp, clear, indicting. For a long time, no one moved. Then Gallo reached for the device. "Careful," said Father Brown. "There are 4 more copies, and one of them is already at the paper. What do you want?" "Nothing," he said. "But God wants a lot." "You're bluffing." "No," said Father Brown. "I'm praying." Gallo stood. "This won't save him. Or you." "Brogan's already saved," he said. "You're the ones in danger." And with that, he walked out. By morning, the story hit the front page. Brogan's voice, transcribed, the recordings distributed, the club shut down, investigations opened, some arrests, a few resignations. Dry fled. The commissioner disavowed his nephew. Gallo disappeared. No one wept. At the church that Sunday, Father Brown lit a candle for a man who wrote the truth in disguise, who used fiction to tell fact, who tried to dress sin up as a story but ended up bleeding it onto the page. A boy came up after Mass. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did the writer die for telling a story?" "Yes," said Father Brown, "but the story lived." The boy nodded. "Then maybe I'll write one someday." "Good," said Father Brown. "Just remember, when you do, don't lie, even to make it beautiful." The boy smiled and ran off. Father Brown stood in the shadows of the church as the light spilled through stained glass. He didn't smile, but for the first time in weeks, he almost did. Chapter 12. The Confession He Never Heard. The city smelled like it always did in late November. Wet pavement, old smoke, and something faintly metallic beneath the scent of decay. Fog rolled in thick over the rooftops, hiding sins and sinners alike. The gutters whispered. The lamplight stuttered. It was the kind of night where every locked door held a secret, and every prayer echoed unanswered. Father Brown moved through it, like a man who had never trusted light anyway. The coat clung to his shoulders, and rain threaded down the sides of his hat like forgotten tears. He wasn't supposed to be out. He wasn't supposed to be following a trail of blood without knowing where it began. But then again, the note had said, "Come alone, come now." He's ready to confess. It had no name, just an address, street, Jude's, confessional, South Nave. And Father Brown, who had waited his whole life to hear the truth from men who rarely told it, couldn't ignore the weight of something that sounded final. The church was locked, but not well. The side door opened with a reluctant sigh and a protest of rusted hinges. The nave was dark, except for one solitary flame flickering beneath the feet of a worn statue. Someone had lit it recently, The air was dense, candle wax, dust, and something sharper, something like regret. The confessional sat in its shadowed corner like a booth that had heard every secret but never judged. Father Brown approached it the way a man approaches a grave he never thought he'd visit. He knocked once, then twice. No answer. He opened the door. He found the body slumped forward, cheek against the lattice, a rosary wrapped around one hand, a tape recorder in the other, blood at the base of the booth, too much for mercy, and a single phrase scrawled in ink across the booth wall. "Forgive me, Father. I waited too long." Father Brown stood in silence. The man was Samuel Devane, once a fixer for the district, long rumored to be the shadow behind the city's last 5 scandals. He hadn't been seen in months. People assumed he'd fled or been buried in a river, and now here he was, a man who had finally come to confess and had met death instead. The recorder was still running. Father Brown pressed stop. He rewound, pressed play. The voice that crackled to life was low, shaking. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. Maybe that's fair. I did things, real things, for money, for favors, for silence. I ruined lives for men who wore clean collars and smiled in courtrooms. But I never did it alone. The worst of it, I kept for myself." There was a pause. Then the tape hissed again. "I killed Robert Vale." Father Brown flinched. That name had once sat on every front page. Vale, the councilman found dead in a burned-out tenement, presumed the victim of a gang hit. But the story had always smelled wrong. The fire had burned too neatly. The witnesses vanished too quickly. Devane had just confirmed it. But why now? The tape rolled on. "I was going to come to you, Father. I had it all written out. Names, dates, the account ledgers, even a photograph. It's in the vestry, hidden behind the icon of Saint Stephen. If you find it, don't waste it." Then static. Father Brown turned off the machine. He didn't call the police. Not yet. He left Devane where he was, with a candle burning beside him and a psalm murmured under breath. Then he crossed to the vestry. The icon was there, untouched. He lifted it gently and found the notebook behind it, thin, leather-bound, and wrapped with string, like it had been tied in haste. Inside were the sins of a city: bribes, murders, threats, laundering, names that belonged to judges, businessmen, clergy. And on the final page, a signature, Detective Harrow. It was written, not in ink, but in the kind of style only fear can produce. Quick, crooked, desperate. At dawn, Father Brown sat across from Harrow at their usual diner. The window was streaked with mist. The waitress didn't smile. She never did. "You found him," Harrow said. "Yes. Dead. Yes." "Damn." Father Brown slid the notebook across the table. Harrow didn't touch it. "You were his handler," Father Brown said softly. "He confessed to it. Just not to me. I didn't know it would end like that. You never do. That's why it's sin, not strategy." Harrow's jaw twitched. "You going to turn it in?" "I'm going to give you a chance to do it first. And if I don't?" "I've already made copies." Harrow stared at the window. "I didn't take money. I just looked the other way." "That's worse," Father Brown said, "because you thought you could stay clean by not touching the blood." A long silence passed between them. "I'll do it," Harrow said. "I know." He stood to go, then paused. "There's something else," Harrow muttered. "There's a name missing from that list." "Whose?" "Yours." Father Brown didn't flinch. "I never said I was above temptation." "No, Harrow said, just better at resisting it. They left the diner together. Harrow went toward the station, Father Brown toward the chapel. Later that week, the city learned the truth in headlines. Devane's story, Vale's murder, Harrow's testimony, the trust dissolved. Arrests made, not everyone paid, not everyone was punished. But something cracked in the city's foundations. That Sunday, Father Brown stepped into the confessional again. It was empty. He sat in the priest's chair, closed his eyes, and waited. No one came, not at first. Then the curtain rustled. A girl's voice, young, hesitant. I stole something, she said. What was it? Hope, she said, from someone who needed it more. Why? Because I didn't believe in it anymore. Father Brown smiled gently behind the screen. Then you've already begun to give it back. Outside, the rain started again. The gutters whispered, the neon flickered, and the city, bruised and aching, took one breath more.